So, bit of background about me, and again, I'm on Twitter at IoT Watch, in case you get bored and you just want to look at Twitter, which is always the risk when you tell people what the Wi-Fi network is. My background is actually, who knows what the thing on the left-hand side is? Ooh, 1, 2, 3, X. You can read it, yes, but knowing what it is another thing. So I started out actually by studying industrial design, product design. And in my first business, we were the first UK distributor of the Arduino. And the Arduino, if you've never had a chance to look at it, is credit card-sized education platform for you to learn about electronics. And I don't care if you've never coded a line of code in your life, and you've never looked at electronics at all. If you ever wanted to play around with electronics and just build a really simple project, in about 2 to 3 hours, you could build something really easy using the Arduino. And the Arduino has now been out for 10 years now. So I stopped doing that, and I'm now a consultant in London, and I also have a connected product of my own called the Goodnight Lamp. And the Goodnight Lamp is a family of connected lamps. You have a big lamp and little lamps. You give the little lamps away to anybody around the world, and when you turn the big lamp on, the little ones turn on. So if you have a family member in a different time zone and you want to let them know that now's a good time for a chat, or you're available right now, if your grandmother lives on her own, even if she just uses it to read before going to bed, you know that she's okay. So a very simple way of sharing availability and presence with someone. And it uses GSM, so you don't need to kind of set up Wi-Fi networks or anything like that. You just plug it in and it works, in theory. The practice is what I'm going to share with you, which is another thing entirely. My kind of 10% projects and things that I do for fun, and I don't know, and I forgot to check whether Krakow has an IoT meetup. Does it? You've got some startups, but you have no meetup. It's not the same. Okay. So I'm giving you homework of setting up a meetup when I leave. And so next time I can come by and meet the meetup organizers. But I have been organizing the one in London for 4 years now. And it's now the biggest meetup in the world around this topic. And I try to advocate for every city to have their own, because it's a topic that's emerging. I'm sure you've heard about it. And I will tell you why, as designers and people usually working on the web, you should care about this area. So, 3 things that I'd like you to consider or try to remember, because I realize you have a full day ahead of you and I'm just kind of the starter, as it were. So if you were to remember anything, is that basically I don't see enough designers in the Internet of Things, and I don't see enough people who know about the web in the Internet of Things, which is kind of a tragedy. And I'll explain why I think this has happened, and I'll explain why I think you should really engage as much as you possibly can, even if you have a handful of startups locally. There's a big world out there that is discussing the importance and potential of the Internet of Things, and I think that this is a conversation that you should really be actively engaging in. The Internet of Things, if you wanted to go back to its origins, actually has an origin in design. It used to be called human-computer interactions for a while. We then kind of moved on to interaction design more broadly. But the idea was always to connect things and to connect a certain aspect of hardware to a digital experience. It then became about the Internet, but initially it was the connection that you could have to technology. And then in the early years of the Internet of Things, we sort of, the industry just tried things. Who has heard of Nabastag? Nobody. The tragedy of it. Rafi would be really annoyed. So the Nabastag was an internet-connected rabbit. It came with a broadband connection that you would get. So in the first sort of use cases of broadband in France, you would get a rabbit, and then you could send a broadband connection to a friend, and they would get a rabbit. And when you moved one of the rabbit's ears, the other rabbit's ears would move as well. It was reasonably esoteric, but this is 2004, 2005, pre-smartphone, pre-Facebook, pre any form of communication that, you know, your grandmother would have. So this became really, really popular with divorced parents and their kids. So the little kid would have a little rabbit, and maybe dad, who lived far away now, had the other rabbit, and they could make up a kind of language between them without having mom in between as a mediator of that conversation. A little bit sad, a little bit niche, but also really interesting at that time. Ambient Devices was a US company that made something called the Ambient Orb, which was basically a ball that glowed according to the stock exchange and how poorly or well your stock was doing. But they also built the Ambient Umbrella, which was an umbrella whose handle would glow when it was going to rain. Obviously, in some parts of the world, like London, where I live, this is sort of, you don't really need it because it's going to rain every single day. But in California, where this was designed, this becomes quite useful because it's not a reflex for you to take the giant Gulf umbrella with you. So this is 2004, 2005. People started experimenting with hardware. Ambient Devices started selling its hardware separately because they realized that maybe developers and people who use the web might want to do their own version of the Ambient Orb or the Ambient Umbrella and might want to play with that technology. The Nabas tag eventually came with little tags where you could put the tag in front of the belly of the rabbit in order to indicate that you had kind of touched in. So if you gave it to your kids and when they came in from school and they were on their own, they could take the keys, put it next to the rabbit, and then the rabbit would send you an SMS to say your kids are home safe now. So very small experiments. Both of these companies don't really exist anymore, which is kind of sad. And the Arduino came along, and it's very hard for me to describe now how important the Arduino is because I think that the discourse has changed. But the Arduino was for designers. It was for artists and designers who wanted to make something and wanted to play around with technology, but had no technical knowledge and didn't need to be afraid to kind of break things. But it was for design. And it also implied that as a designer, you would have come up with an idea that you had well researched, there was a market there was a need there were lots of things in place that were part of your practice as a design student that would make this a useful tool, because it would come a little bit later on in the stage of coming up with an idea. And you know, you might be a design student, so you didn't necessarily have a whole lot of money available. And this is still something like 15 euros. So it's not a lot of money. I don't know what it is in zloty. Someone will have to tell me. And it also became part of a whole conversation around openness and hacking and making, and lots of things emerged out of that. Lots of pieces of open source software that you could use the Arduino with, lots of ways of controlling things, lots and lots of artists making fantastic projects, visual projects that had a hardware component. And all of those things were open source. There was a practice of open sharing. There were open design manifestos. People even in the furniture industry started looking at this and saying, this is really interesting. And Open Design Now, which is a book that I recommend you reading, is a wonderful book that kind of talks about and was written at around that time. And people started gathering and talking about what openness meant and what open source meant in these contexts of physical design, because when you buy something from a large corporate, it's not an open design, it's a closed design. And then this happened, which I think is the initial, it doesn't even look like that anymore, I realized, and I was just like, wow, this feels so antiquated. There's a giant button is huge, and this screen, and people got really distracted by this. And people in design, and people in visual design, and people who had worked in agencies, and people who had been doing web design at the time, but suddenly this took away so much attention, and so much talent with it, which I think is really interesting. Because it wasn't about necessarily learning new things. learning how to code, learning about electronics, but it became about applying the set of skills that you might already have had, and then translating them into a new environment with new user experiences, of course, and a new platform, but very different, and in a way, its own little box. Hardware and electronics and all of these things and openness and open source are really complex conversations, really multidisciplinary conversations. And this sort of saw a whole bunch of people sort of go away for a little while. And it meant that the people who picked up on the Arduino were not necessarily designers, were not UX people, were not web people. They were people who would describe themselves eventually as makers, or that we would describe as makers. But really people from all over the corporate world, the research world. You can't really swing a cat without someone who's an engineer having done something with an Arduino at one point for a demo internally or to kind of show something off. And even in really, really large corporations and large environments, people are using it to make a point. This is an open source version of Curiosity, the Mars rover robot that was sort of prototyped for NASA during the NASA Challenge. Salesforce, of all people, use Arduino to make kind of small demos around some of the things that they're now offering as part of their giant IoT platforms. It kind of came into the hands of a really different audience. And it meant that it changed what success looked like. It wasn't about necessarily things being useful. It was that they could be done at all. And the act of making became the thing. It's the fact that you had made something. You had made something into the world. You had put something out there, and that was almost good enough. And then something else happened, which was crowdfunding. And that also really changed the conversation, because then the conversation became about whether, not again whether it was useful, but whether it was making and raising money. Not whether it was delivering on the promises, but whether it was raising capital and raising so-called market interest. So not only could you make something, but you could get 6,000 people to put some money towards it and put it on crowdfunding. And that became success, or what we call success now in the Internet of Things. So this is, as of this morning, the most funded Kickstarter projects ever, which is, absolutely fascinating, considering if you know the market dynamics and you know how companies work, that most of this is Pebble, and one thing is a giant cooler that has a iPhone dock and speakers integrated. And that raised, I can't remember how many million, and it is still not shipped, I think. This is 2 years ago. And these are some of the comments, actually, on that particular product page. And you can, just read the first one, and you kind of go, oh my God, I want to die for these guys, because how embarrassing. But this is success. This is the most funded Kickstarter, or it's the second most funded Kickstarter ever. And it's not really even a connected product per se, but it's a product, and it was made, and it's something that looks like it was made and that looks like success. Only if you dig a little bit deeper into the campaign, do you realize that someone went to the trouble of creating a Facebook page of people who would complain about, where was my expensive fridge cooler? Which, by the laws of what we know about customer experience and consumer experience and user experience, are all completely atrocious. But in the bubble where making and pretending like you're delivering and pretending like value is what you raise are all good things, stuff like this doesn't, bother them at all. And if you scroll down, if you ever go to that page to have a bit of a laugh, you can scroll down and see the passive-aggressive tone of the replies of the founders. It's pretty entertaining. Because, of course, disappointment has now become also, is now sort of part of the process of people realizing that actually it's probably a better idea to do something useful and something that people want, rather than raise a ton of money for something that may or may not happen. And because there's lots of really amazingly relevant reasons why they may or may not happen. The team might be wrong. It might be a small team of people who are not completely experienced in what they're doing. They put themselves the pressure of delivering within 6 months, whereas anybody who knows anything about the physical world knows that that's just crazy. And maybe the money isn't even enough. And maybe they didn't really calculate what it takes to actually make things at scale. So lots of really excellent reasons why these things disappoint. It's just that they're really terrible at telling us that that's why, and that's what's going to happen ultimately. And the average startup really has 99 problems, and most of these problems have very little to do with design and traditional design, if you took a traditional stance. Plenty to do with, let's say, a more stretched version of design, which is design at its broadest sense. But then we're not really talking about hiring one person to solve these problems. We're kind of talking about hiring 5 people to solve these problems. And these are all design issues, but they involve completely different people who have a say in how design expresses itself inside of a business, inside of an idea. So even when we talk about, oh, well, you know, things are not user-centered and all these ideas don't really understand, they don't understand their users, they don't understand design, well, they also have a lot of other things to take care of, and it's easy for them to dismiss design and dismiss user experience because they're kind of worried about IP, they're worried about running out of money, they're worried about the factory that delivered a whole bunch of things that don't even work, they're worried about how long it's taking the factory to deliver the things that don't work. So there's so much for them to do and so little knowledge of how important it is to try to get some things right really early on. And it's not that good ideas don't exist, but often they maybe don't get the attention that they deserve. So it's less exciting to think about a wearable device that might keep you safe if you're a woman living in an urban environment that's very dangerous, or you have asthma and you're really looking to understand where you get an attack. And you're also looking to reduce the amount of water that you use at home. These are all really excellent, interesting, ethically challenging ideas. But they don't necessarily get the funding or backing that they need because we don't necessarily, as consumers, respond to them in the same way as we respond when we see a really cool looking fridge. And there's lots and lots of really amazing product-dependent services. So if you're more of a service person and you're kind of thinking, well, you know, I know nothing about product design, I know everything about user experience online, there's loads of people also doing that. So Hello Tractor, which I really love, is a service that allows a farmer who can't afford a piece of equipment to text through SMS, just say, I want this kind of tractor for 2 hours tomorrow. And then someone goes and delivers it to them, which is amazing. It's an interaction with physical capabilities that democratizes access to farming capabilities, makes it easier for someone to do sort of part-time farming and to maybe sell a little bit of it, but really provide for their family first. Buffalo Grid is a UK company. They make these solar-powered boxes that gives you Wi-Fi access and allow you to charge up your phone. So they go to rural areas in India, and they just allow people to charge up their phones, because in rural, very, very poor areas, people have smartphones, because people want to feel engaged with the rest of the world. So they will, you know, buy a smartphone before they buy 20 other things that you and I would buy. but they don't necessarily have access to power and continuous power. So people like that and startups like that are on the outskirts of what we consider success, because we're valuing raising money on crowdfunding more than we are great ideas. This has turned out terrible looking. This is another startup in the UK called the Oxford Flood Network. They do something really, really simple. They put sensors underneath bridges that measure how high the water is. So very, very simple. That information is then mapped onto a map so that you know if there's going to be flooding in your area. This doesn't make sense for some parts of the world, but other parts of the world, it's really important and really crucial. And now they have, through a partnership, because this is one guy doing this in the UK, they have figured out how to map that information and do these demonstrators and pilots across the UK. But if you had 20 people working with this guy, this would be all over the world in the poorest areas, in the areas that need it the most, because the tech is cheap, really cheap. But, you know, we're buying games, watches, fridges. We're buying into that version of the future. We're buying into the version of the future that was sold to us by 1950s comic books. And that, I think, is where design can change the most and can help change the conversation. Because it can't really necessarily be about the things that we want as an average consumer, as a middle class. You know, I'm pretty sure here we do okay. We came to a conference about technology and the web. We're fine. We're probably not going to need a sensor that tells us whether a house is going to flood or not. But other people do, and other people really need these things to happen. But the capital, the intelligence, and the talent in rooms like these around the world is what makes those ideas possible. So, what can you do? What should you be doing? What should you be looking at? You have some startups nearby and near you, and that's great. I think you should talk to them, figure out if you can help in any way. It might just be by mentoring them, so a couple of hours every month. It might be by coming in as a sort of interim CDO or interim CIO or whatever you want to call it, but just sort of sit in on the process a little bit. Doesn't mean you have to quit your day job and go work for them for free immediately. You might eventually do that because what they're doing is fantastic and they're getting the support. But helping them in the really early stages is really important and really key. If you don't have a meetup, which it doesn't sound like you do, I really encourage you to start one, because even if you're notionally only curious about this space, having a meeting point and having a conversation and a conversation monthly is really useful. And it's a really great way of figuring out who around you has a vested interest in what kind of ideas. Maybe there are problems to be solved in Poland that will only work in Poland for a Polish geography, for a Polish demographic audience, social problems that could be addressed with new technologies, lots of things that could only exist here. In the same way that you have your own web ecology and your own web community, you should also have your own web and IoT and product and conversation. And the great thing about starting an IoT meetup in any city in the world is that nobody knows what IoT means to them yet. So you'll get lots of different people coming to the table, and lots of different people who have completely different interests. It's one of these areas that right now is exciting enough to get a kind of multidisciplinary group of people excited. And I don't think that you can say that about many disciplines now. Read some books, read some stuff about this, even if you're just kind of artificially curious or you want to know what UX means in a context of IoT. People have written books about this stuff. They're on iot.london/bookshelf. I just have a list of all the ones I know. If there's any that I have not put through, maybe there's some written in Polish, let me know and I'll add it to the list. But really engage and start to sniff around this place and have a little look around this space, because I think this is going to be an area of great development worldwide. Capital is starting to be unlocked around this space from normal investment funds. It's still difficult. I was in Gdansk a few weeks ago. I'm sure that's not how it's pronounced. But there was a whole kind of raft of local startups there who were doing IoT stuff. And that's exciting. I didn't think that I would see exciting local startups, but there were. And I think that ultimately, as designers, as people involved in the web, you're already really used to thinking horizontally about problems and thinking about the potential everywhere. And you're the connectors. You're the people who make connections happen. It's just that I'm asking you to make connections even further and to stretch who you meet a little bit more and to engage a little bit further in order to continue to make those connections and be the job of the connector, which you already are. And with that, I wish you very good luck. Q&A, I think. I have to wait.
I'm coming. Okay. I'm here. Okay. Thank you, Alex. Thanks a lot. Guys, do you have any questions? I've got some soap for you.
There's one at the back.
Okay.
So what do you think of IoT in the future? How it can work? I'm referring to futurologists' visions like Michio Kaku, predicting the future with all the sensors around us in every wall, every piece. So that's one question. And
yes.
Also, are you familiar with Estimate startup from Krakow? Yeah. So
yeah, I know them well. Yeah. I've been trying to convince them to come to London for months now. And they're like, oh yeah, we're not in town often enough. On the kind of future vision stuff, we don't have jetpacks, you know. The future vision stuff is useful, but not that useful. And ultimately, I think that you're in a position, you know, who here builds websites? Raise your hands. Who helps build websites? Who are the rest of you? You're not, I don't think here there's a bunch of, what would be a non-insulting example? You're not like accountants and lawyers who are looking at the industry and going, oh, what is happening? Oh my God, I have no stake in this whatsoever. You have plenty of stake in this. And you have plenty of connections to make sure that someone stupid who wants to, so for example, I read this thing yesterday. Apparently, next year, 8 million Americans will be forced to wear a wearable if they want to get a job at particular businesses. And I was just like, this is the, you know, if you wanted a sign that corporate jobs are dead, that's the sign that corporate jobs are dead. Because someone made a decision of saying, I'm tired of paying for people's holiday leave. How do we make sure that people are healthy in our work environment? I know, we're going to give them some Fitbits. And you kind of look at this and you're like, ugh, because these are business decisions, but there's also staff working around those business leaders who are saying, yes, this is a great idea. And so those people can be stopped by having someone in an organization say, no, that's a bad idea. And you're those kinds of people, I would assume, unless I've completely misjudged the room, in which case I apologize to the lawyers and accountants in the room. But you're not neutral parties to these visions. You're not consumers of these visions. You help these visions take place or not take place. And you can take opposition stance to those visions. And you can say, actually, no, in my startup, we don't share people's data with third-party providers. We do something else. We give 10% of our profits to charity. We give people shoes. Whatever. There is no, if we let these, however beautifully dystopian visions take a hold of our imagination, then we start to believe someone else's vision, and we might as well just become lawyers and accountants, because then you have no agency and you can just sit there and type away until someone else takes your job. So, you know, I don't think that you should ever look at someone's vision of the future and take that for granted. I think that's bullshit, frankly. Excuse the language. And yes, I love Estimote. Estimote is great. Yes.
So that everybody can hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
We do have a lot of meetups in Krakow that are based around the startup scene. I'm wondering what challenges do you have, because in Krakow we already have so many free events, and there's a lot of like this stuff going on. What are your challenges in carrying out the IoT events in London, and how would you recommend like starting that up here? Would you recommend, well, I know you recommend starting it up.
Thank you for volunteering to become the leader of the first IoT meetup in Krakow. Big round of applause. That was so easy. I live in London, 14 million people, more free meetups than you can, you know, choose on the average day. Yes, it's a challenge, of course. When I started, there were 40 people signed up on meetup.com, and maybe we got 10, 15 people every time. That's good enough to start. You don't need a lot. When I really started, which is in 2007 with the Arduino, we used to organize what we called hardware hacker meetups. And we would go to a pub, and we would sit there and wait. And we got 2 people, 4 people the next month, 6 people the next month, 15 people the month after that. We never took those numbers as being too small. Any community, however big it is a community. And my drop-off rate, so I have on average I sell 120 free tickets on meetup.com, and I have 300 people on a waiting list. 40 people come. And that's okay, because they're the 40 right people who really wanted to come. And I treat them like, you know, they're very precious, as they are. I write a newsletter every month with everything that's happening around the world around this topic, because people, you know, see the number 8,000 and they go, oh my God, you have so many eyeballs, let me email you all my things. And I just condense that into a small newsletter. I send it out. Over 7,000 people read that. I don't know how many of them have ever attended a meetup. I don't care. I let them know it does its own thing, and that's good enough. But I know that people find jobs through it, people find co-founders through it, people find funding through it. And that's all that matters to me. The numbers, in effect, don't matter. So even if you have a lot of startups, or a lot of startup events, or tech events, or whatever events, one more is not going to overdo it, and it's certainly not going to be non-essential, because it is its own conversation.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
What's the coolest crowdfunding campaign that you've seen? Because you talked about the abusive usage of the platforms, but what's something related to IoT that you've seen and went, wow, this is super cool?
The problem is seeing something on a crowdfunding campaign that's super cool doesn't mean that it actually turns into something. So it looks super cool, and then you're like, but this is not possible due to the laws of physics. So the latest super cool thing I saw, which is not probably possible due to the law of physics, is and anything that's in-ear I always think is hilarious, like an in-ear thing that you place and it does essentially speech to kind of translation on the go for you. And you're just like, ugh. Because this is so typical of a world that thinks that learning other languages is like the most, ridiculous notion ever, and everything should be in English, of course. So I just thought it was quite funny. It also, you can see the problems. I was in, this is all just random banter, so stop me at any point, because we are going to run out of time. I was in Stansted Airport yesterday getting over here, and someone somewhere decided that text-to-speech French was a really good idea for the announcements that they have. And my mother tongue is French. And I'm there going, ugh, because the woman is saying a sentence that is grammatically incorrect, but someone typed in, please do not leave your bags at your own risk, or whatever it is. And you're like, no, this is incorrect. And there's so much of that texture and that, again, a design and a user-centered approach to design that when you look at some of these ideas, the first thing I saw when I saw this in-ear thing was, how do you deal with humor? How do you deal with dry humor? Where you said something that doesn't look funny in writing, and it really won't sound funny if you just translate it as is, and it's not like the person in translation is going to go, ha-ha. So, yeah, cool looking, but yeah, there's so much going on. It's extremely hard to keep up. It's easier to keep up with the success stories, because the announcement of something, again, it's just, it's like my version of watching TV. I don't watch TV. I don't even have a television. I don't use Netflix. I just watch Twitter. It's just like, another thing, another thing. This morning was a sole for shoes that would help you, prevent you from getting notifications on your phone, because you're in a social situation where getting notifications on your phone is not cool. So you would wear this pair of shoes, and the soles would communicate to your phone and you're like, what? And this is on, Indiegogo. Yeah, our campaign is live. And you're like, good luck.
Well, I just want to say that I looked it up, and there is an IoT meetup in Krakow.
Oh, great.
And they started a year ago, and looks like they have 277 members.
Great.
And probably more information is on meetup.com.
Go now, attend now. Great, you're already doing it. Fantastic. Go and see these people, whoever they might be. And, go see what's happening. Go see what's happening in your area. There's bound to be some either really early stage startups that need some help. And what I saw in Gdansk was, how do you say it? How do you pronounce it? Is it just Dansk?
Gdańsk.
Right. It's really helpful. Okay. What I saw was really, really early stage. Really early stage. Some people who just had ideas or half-baked ideas at best. A couple who really had some products that they were shipping and industrializing, but most of them, it was still idea stage, and that's perfect for you guys.
We've got time for one more question.
More questions.
Hi, I'm Erin, and I work for Dolby Labs.
Hi.
We're an entertainment company. We make stuff for movies and TV and, TVs, movie theaters, mobile phones, tablets, rich people.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
And let's not devalue fun, right? We're here because it's fun. Mm-hmm. Now, that's the first disconnected idea. Here's the second disconnected idea. We, as content people, are weirdly interdisciplinary. Mm-hmm. In my case, music, statistics, translation, and audio processing. I mean, weird stuff. Third disconnected idea, we're all overworked. Fourth disconnected idea, most of us work for companies that are kind of insular. Like, we're all about entertainment. We're not talking to people in India who need solar Wi-Fi. How do we start bridging some of these weirdly disconnected ideas that ought to be so connected? And what do people who need solar Wi-Fi need from entertainment people?
I don't think you can guess what people need. You know, it's kind of like saying, I have nothing in common with people in Poland ever, because they live somewhere else. And I live in London, so what's the point of me coming over and seeing them? Like, you never know what can happen unless you allow yourself to be exposed to both meeting different people and being exposed to different ideas. It does take time, and I appreciate that we're all overworked, but we're also, with that in mind, we should also be overfunded, because we're all having so much fun at work because we're all doing what we love, right? And notionally, we're in the creative business because, you know, again, we're hopefully not all accountants, lawyers. And we chose professions that could have a potential for multidisciplinarity that may or may not be realized. And I think that this is why I'm encouraging you to show up en masse to this type of meetup right now, because in a few years it might mean something very different to people, and it might, in the case of London, for example, there are now 10 meetups around IoT, because people have decided to take kind of different chunks of it. So someone has started an IoT and entertainment meetup. And so I'm kind of curious as to what gets talked about there that wouldn't have been easy to talk about somewhere else. Some people are using or talking about kind of the business of IoT, and then I can imagine some of the conversations that are happening there. So before things get oversaturated around you is kind of the perfect time to go, let's just use this term as a bucket, and let's just see who thinks that they have a vested interest in that bucket. And it might just be, again, the investment of one evening a month where you go and you show up somewhere and you just say, I'm in the entertainment business. What can you do for me? And then people will come to you and go, actually, I have a wearable that allows storytelling to happen depending on your state, your heart rate or whatever. And you'll see that you can make a connection and that it's actually not such a stretch for your business to work. It just means that your partnerships and the types of partnerships that you create might be very different from what you're used to dealing with. It might not be a large business that comes to you with a licensing agreement. It might be small startup, 2 people, a thing that's an idea that they're prototyping in an incubator, but you think, okay, let's do something for an ad campaign, and off we go, and then see if we can get some signups, and then we'll help you industrialize because we know these other people somewhere else. The connectors, the connections, this is really about having an open mind around where you sit and what you have to offer. But again, being conscious of time, it doesn't mean you have to sit there in front of Twitter like I do and go popcorn. But you can decide to put in, 2 hours a month just to go and sniff around and see what's happening. And do it with enough purpose that you'll get to meet people. So the meetup in London, people get the most out of it when they keep going, because they don't know who they're going to meet every time. Every time I ask how many people have been there for the first time, and at least 30 to 40% of the room raises their hands, which means it's just a big, you've got a big rotation of people going and interested in this topic. And so every time you're faced with, I'm an architect, I'm a doctor, I'm a whatever, and then those conversations can happen. I hope that helps.